Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into the strange, delicate and endlessly fascinating world of time itself, a place where moments fold, echoes repeat, and the possibilities of travel stretch far beyond the borders of what we believe to be possible. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let your breathing fall into an easy rhythm. We're about to drift through ideas that stretch from ancient myths to the gentle curves of modern physics, and if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Tonight, we'll walk beside those who dare to imagine the past rewritten, the future revisited, and the fabric of reality softly reshaped. And as these ideas begin to settle, you may sense the faintest whisper of a question that has followed humanity for centuries. What if time is not a straight line but a landscape we've only just begun to see? When you're ready, we'll begin. Time has always carried a quiet pull, a soft and persistent tug on the deepest parts of the human mind. Long before clocks ticked on our walls or satellites circled the planet, people looked at the fading trail of their own memories and wondered whether the moments behind them were truly gone or simply hiding just out of reach. Perhaps this is why the thought of travelling through time, rewinding it, pausing it, stepping outside it, feels less like fantasy and more like an instinct we've carried for as long as we've been able to dream. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can almost imagine time not as something rigid, but as something gentle and pliable. It becomes a river flowing softly past your feet, and each moment is a ripple drifting downstream. You can see them clearly only for a heartbeat, before they blur into distance. Yet even as they fade, you feel their presence. They shaped the shore beneath you, the current around you, and the path you now stand upon. And in that quiet realization, it's hard not to imagine how it would feel to dip your hand into the water and swirl it backward, watching the ripples return to where they began. This longing to revisit, to revise, to understand, has always been with us. Ancient storytellers spoke of enchanted doorways that returned travellers to moments they had already lived. Early philosophers wondered whether the past could still exist somewhere, preserved like a painting in another room of the universe. And even now, when our world is filled with the hum of science and technology, the same yearning remains. Perhaps you felt it during a quiet evening walk, when a memory rose uninvited and you wished you could step back into it, just to feel the air, hear the voices, or choose differently. In a way, we're never far from these moments. Memory itself is a type of time travel, our own personal Chrononauts vessel. When you recall a childhood afternoon, you're not simply replaying an image. Your mind is lifting you gently into a space where emotion, colour and sound still exist. That moment becomes alive again, not as a photograph, but as a living scene. The scent of rain on the pavement may return, or the warmth of a hand you once held. For a breath, you stand inside a time that technically no longer exists, yet somehow still remains. Scientists sometimes describe this as mental time travel, but when spoken softly without formulas or sharp definitions, it is simply the mind remembering how to move. And then there is the other direction, not backward, but forward. When you imagine next week, next year, or the distant hopes you hold quietly inside, you're moving through time in another sense. You may picture a version of yourself who is calmer, happier, wiser, or simply living out a possibility that hasn't yet arrived. The mind steps lightly into a moment that does not yet exist, but feels as real as any memory. You shape the image, add the details, and breathe life into something the universe has not yet presented. It is a gentle forecast, a glimpse of the road ahead. These experiences, looking backward with memory, looking forward with imagination, create a bridge between the human heart and the physics of time. Even before we learn what science has discovered, we already feel time's fluidity within us. Our memories return in loops, our hopes project us forward, our regrets pull us to the places we left behind. In quiet moments, we sense that life is not simply a straight line, but a series of overlapping echoes. And perhaps this is why the idea of rewriting the past resonates so deeply. It's not just about avoiding mistakes or correcting missteps. Sometimes it's about tenderness, revisiting a conversation we wish we had handled with more patience, holding someone's hand for just a moment longer, choosing a kinder word. It's not about changing history. It's about reconnecting with the fragile parts of ourselves that time carried downstream before we realized how precious they were. Even science, for all its precision, has begun to paint time as something more flexible than once believed. Rather than a rigid arrow, it may be a soft fabric capable of bending, stretching, or folding. And in the gentle bending of that fabric, whether through memory, emotion, or the vast machinery of the cosmos, time begins to feel less like a ruler on a table and more like a landscape we walk through, leaving footprints as we go. As this idea settles gently, a new question begins to rise, quiet and curious. If time feels soft within us, could it also be soft within the universe itself? When you look back at the long arc of human history, you begin to notice something gentle but unmistakable. The idea of stepping outside the ordinary flow of time has followed us like a quiet shadow. Long before modern science began describing the universe with curves and clocks, people were already imagining doors that opened into moments they had lost, or windows through which they could glimpse what had not yet arrived. These old stories were not treated as physics, of course. They were treated as whispers from the edge of understanding, small reflections of how deeply we crave a second look at the tapestry of our lives. In ancient myths, the idea of revisiting the past often appeared as enchanted forests where a single night might stretch into 100 years, or as rivers that carried travellers into distant ages if they stepped into the wrong shimmering pool. The characters in these stories rarely returned unchanged. They came back wiser, sadder, or somehow older than their own memories. And though these tales were wrapped in magic, they were rooted in something amazingly familiar. The sense that time itself might be more fluid and more mysterious than it appears. It's not difficult to understand why such stories found a home in human imagination. You've probably had moments where you wished for a way to step back, not necessarily to fix something, but simply to live it again with the clarity you have now. Maybe a conversation that ended too soon, a person you miss, or a choice that felt small at the time, but now shines like a turning point. Even without magic portals or mythical rivers, we carry a quiet longing for those turning points and crossroads. It's a longing that makes the idea of time travel feel less like a fantastical invention and more like a reflection of something already inside us. Over centuries, as human understanding grew, philosophers began to ask a different kind of question. Instead of wondering about doorways hidden in the forest, they wondered whether the past might still exist somewhere, intact, layered, preserved in a way our senses simply can't detect. They compared time to a scroll, where every moment is still written even if we can't see the earlier lines. Others imagined time as a grand stage, with every event still standing in the wings even after it's seen as past. These weren't scientific frameworks, but gentle attempts to help us understand why the desire to revisit the past feels so instinctive. Then, slowly, the world changed. Telescopes grew larger, mathematics grew sharper, and scientists began describing time not as something rigid, but as something shaped by motion and gravity. And yet, remarkably, this new, scientific vision did not erase the old longing, it deepened it. Because the more we learned, the more we realized that time was even stranger, softer, and more flexible than the mythmakers had ever imagined. Modern physics suggests that time isn't a universal heartbeat ticking the same way everywhere. Instead, it flows differently depending on how fast you move or how strong gravity is where you stand. But rather than presenting these ideas with sharp equations, you can imagine them like this. Time is a river that doesn't always run at the same speed. In some places, it slows to a lazy drift. In others, it rushes quickly, pulling everything with it. And if two travellers stand at different shores of this river, their experiences of that flow may not match. What this means is quietly astonishing. A person who spends time orbiting the Earth high above its surface, where gravity is slightly weaker, will age a little more slowly than someone standing firmly on the ground. A fast-moving traveller, speeding through space, will return younger than the friend who stayed home. In everyday life, the difference is tiny, but it's real. Scientists sometimes describe this in terms of dilation, but softly translated, it simply means that time stretches and relaxes depending on how it's held. This creates a small but undeniable truth. We are already brushing against the edges of time travel, not with machines or portals, but with the quiet rules of the universe itself. A clock on a speeding satellite ticks at a slightly different rhythm than one on your bedside table. An astronaut, after circling the Earth thousands of times, returns home just a little younger than their twin. These differences are delicate, but they remind us that time is less like an unbreakable arrow and more like a thread that can be pulled or eased. And so we find ourselves in an unusual position. The stories we once told around fires, stories of slipping into forgotten ages or glimpsing possible futures, are not entirely incompatible with the universe we live in. While we are far from walking through shimmering doorways or rewriting entire eras, the boundary between myth and science has thinned. We now understand that time is not a simple ruler marking distance between events. It is a landscape, shaped by movement and gravity, where different paths can lead to different experiences of the very same moment. This realization does something gentle inside us. It softens the line between what we think is possible and what we once thought belonged only to dreams. It encourages us to imagine time not as a strict, unchanging script, but as a living world layered with possibilities. And suddenly, the dream of stepping into another moment, whether in the past or the future, feels less like an escape and more like a natural extension of curiosity. As you let that thought settle, a subtle shift begins. You may feel time not as a straight road stretching behind and ahead, but as a soft terrain of memories, choices, and quiet wonders. And within that softness, a question rises almost on its own. If time is flexible, and if the rules of the universe allow moments to flow differently across its vast canvas, then what truly stops us from imagining a deeper journey, one where paradoxes appear not as impossibilities, but as invitations? And with that gentle curiosity, we move closer to the heart of our next exploration. There is a quiet moment, somewhere between the comfort of imagination and the clarity of science, where the two begin to blur. It's a place where an old story told by candlelight meets a modern equation whispered by starlight, and together they form something new, something gentle, yet deeply revealing. To understand how we arrived at the scientific view of time, we don't need to picture chalkboards full of symbols or complicated formulas. Instead, we can imagine a single idea unfolding slowly, like a piece of fabric being lifted at one corner and allowed to ripple outward. For most of human history, time appeared simple. It moved forward in one steady march, unbending and unbroken. People believed they were carried along by an invisible current they could not influence, a current so consistent that even the sun itself seemed to move according to its rhythm. But as our understanding of the universe deepened, as telescopes revealed galaxies drifting like lanterns across a dark sea, and clocks grew precise enough to measure the smallest shiver of a second, we began to notice that the current was not as steady as it seemed. The first gentle hint came when scientists realized that light, traveling through the universe like a patient messenger, always moved at the same speed, no matter who observed it or how they were moving. This was not presented as a hard equation, but as a curious truth. Light carries its own tempo, its own rhythm, and it never changes that rhythm for anyone. To make room for this constant rhythm, something else had to give, and that something was time. A simple way to picture this is to imagine two travellers walking along a shoreline. One moves slowly, pausing often to look at the waves. The other moves swiftly, almost running at times. Yet somehow, no matter their speed, the sound of the waves, the universe's background rhythm reaches them in perfect synchrony. For this to happen, their experience of the shoreline itself must stretch or compress quietly beneath their feet, adjusting itself so that the rhythm remains unchanged. In a similar way, time stretches for the swift traveller and relaxes for the slower one, not in a dramatic science fiction way, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible manner. The faster you move, the more time gentles its pace for you. The closer you stand to something massive such as a planet or a star, the more time slows itself as if leaning toward gravity's pull. And although these differences are small in everyday life, they become meaningful when observed across great distances or high speeds. There's nothing mystical about this. It is simply the universe allowing its fabric to bend rather than break. Picture time and space not as separate threads, but as a single sheet, supple and woven with care. When a heavy object rests upon the sheet, the fabric dips. When something moves swiftly across it, the fabric stretches along its path. This sheet is not static. It breathes and curves, responding to everything within it. What this means, softly translated, is that time is not the strict ruler we once assumed. It is more like a landscape that reshapes itself around travellers, adjusting to their movement and their surroundings. A satellite circling Earth experiences slightly different time from the device resting in your pocket, not because its clock is flawed, but because it is following a gentler slope in the cosmic fabric. This is the threshold where imagination begins to meet physics. Childhood fantasies about time running differently in enchanted places or magical forests suddenly don't seem so far removed from reality. The science behind it, while grounded in careful measurement, feels almost poetic in how it describes the flexibility of the universe. Move quickly enough, rest near something massive enough, or glide through space with enough momentum, and time responds, not harshly, but with a kind of graceful accommodation. And it is here, in this gentle bending of time, that we begin to glimpse the foundations of deeper possibilities. If time can slow, then perhaps time can fold. If it can stretch, perhaps it can twist. And if movement and gravity can influence its rhythm, perhaps there are circumstances where the river of time does more than flow. It may loop, curl, or even connect distant moments in ways our intuition struggles to grasp. This does not mean we step into paradoxes or time machines just yet. Instead, we approach the doorway where the idea becomes conceivable. The fabric of the universe is no longer rigid, it is responsive. And once you understand that, the idea of travelling through time becomes less like a fantasy and more like a question waiting to be explored. Even Einstein, whose work first revealed this flexibility, often explained it using stories rather than symbols. He spoke gently of trains passing each other, of clocks carried up mountains, of beams of light bouncing between mirrors. These weren't puzzles for mathematicians, they were windows for anyone with curiosity. And through those windows a new understanding emerged. time is woven into the universe, not perched outside it. Whatever happens to space happens also to time. This realization changes how we see everything around us. The ticking of a watch becomes a tiny echo of cosmic structure. The aging of a face becomes a conversation between biology and gravity. The duration between heartbeats becomes a thread tied to the movement of galaxies. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boundary between imagination and physics begins to dissolve. You might find yourself thinking back to the stories from childhood, where travellers wandered into places where time behaved strangely. In a quiet way, science is telling us that the universe genuinely contains such places, not in mystical forests or enchanted groves, but in massive stars in the heart of galaxies or in the depths of motion itself. The difference is that now, instead of magic, we speak of curvature. Instead of spells, we speak of gravity. And instead of mystery, we speak of the fabric of space-time bending softly around everything it touches. But the feeling remains the same. The wonder remains the same. And as this idea settles, we move gently toward the next question, one that has puzzled thinkers for centuries. If time can bend, what happens when it bends too far? There's a moment in every conversation about time travel when curiosity turns suddenly into a quiet ache of confusion. It arrives the instant someone asks a question so simple, so deceptively innocent, that it unsettles the entire structure of cause and effect. The question goes something like this: what if you went back in time and prevented your grandparents from meeting? The moment those words settle into the air, a faint crack appears, like a line forming across a frozen lake, and it becomes clear we've stepped onto one of the most fragile places in all of thought. This is the grandfather paradox, often described as the most famous problem in time travel. Its charm lies in its simplicity. Its power lies in the way it takes something familiar, family, ancestry, the gentle chain of generations, and uses it to expose something deeply unsettling. If you could rewrite the past, would you also erase the version of yourself who travelled there in the first place? To understand why this paradox cuts so sharply, imagine time not as a river, but as a narrow footpath stretching behind you. Every step you've taken leaves a footprint. Every footprint leads precisely to the next one. Your parents' footsteps lead to yours. Your grandparents' footsteps lead to theirs. The path is continuous, connected, and complete. Now imagine walking backward along that path to a moment long before your own footsteps existed. Imagine gently brushing away one of your grandparents' footprints. The question that follows arrives softly, but it hits like a quiet shock. If the footprint is gone, where exactly are you standing? The paradox asks whether reality can tolerate such a contradiction. If you remove the cause, how can the effect remain? If you erase the beginning of a story, how can the final chapter still be written? These questions may seem playful at first, like riddles whispered across a campfire, but as you follow them deeper, they start to feel heavier, like stones in your hand, cool and solid and strangely ancient. There is something profoundly human in the way the paradox touches us. We all carry memories of moments we wish we could adjust, conversations we wish we could soften, or decisions that still glow faintly with regret. The idea of returning to those moments is tempting. But the grandfather paradox stands quietly in the doorway, reminding us that changing the past isn't like editing a diary entry. The past is part of us, woven into our existence. Pull one thread, and the whole tapestry shifts. Philosophers have explored this problem for centuries, long before modern physics offered its own perspective. Some suggested that the paradox proves time travel to the past is impossible, that the universe simply would not allow an action that contradicts its own structure. Others proposed more unusual solutions. Perhaps reality would correct itself in subtle ways, nudging events back toward the outcome that preserves the traveller's existence. If a traveller tried to interfere, perhaps a gust of wind would extinguish the candle before they could act, or perhaps their voice would falter at the crucial moment. small coincidences that ensure the path remains unbroken. From a storytelling perspective, these ideas are fascinating. From a scientific perspective, they hint at something deeper. The grandfather paradox forces us to confront the rules of cause and effect, the gentle but unbreakable order linking one moment to the next. These rules are not written in ink. They're woven into the very structure of time itself. Modern physics approaches the paradox with a quiet mixture of caution and curiosity. Rather than declaring it impossible, it begins by asking, what is time made of? And how does reality preserve consistency? When scientists speak of time as a fabric, they mean that moments are not isolated. Each moment is connected, like threads in a tightly woven blanket. Pull one too sharply and the fabric ripples outward. One gentle way to imagine this is to picture a spider's web in the early morning light. Each strand supports the next. If you press lightly on one thread, the entire web trembles. Now imagine that each strand is a cause leading to an effect. To pluck away a single strand, the meeting of two ancestors, would send vibrations across the entire web, even across the strands that eventually lead to the traveller. In this view, the paradox isn't simply about erasing a person. It's about disturbing a structure so delicate and interconnected that it resists contradiction. Some ideas suggest that if a traveller returned to the past, they might find themselves unable to change anything that would undo their own existence. Not because of a physical barrier, but because the events of the past are already part of the web that led them there. It's not fate in the dramatic sense. It's simply the universe maintaining its own consistency, like a story refusing to contradict its own chapters. In this soft interpretation, the paradox becomes not a dead end, but a reminder that the past is not clay to be reshaped at will. It is part of the structure that makes each of us possible. Yet other interpretations take a very different path. They suggest that attempting to change the past does not cause a contradiction at all. It simply diverts the traveller into a different branch of reality. In that view, the paradox becomes a doorway rather than a wall, but that is a journey we will approach slowly in its own time. For now, the grandfather paradox remains what it has always been. A quiet mirror reflecting how fragile our understanding of time has been. It asks us to consider not just the physics of moments, but the delicate continuity that makes each life possible. And as the question lingers, softly, like a ripple expanding across still water, it invites us to look more closely at what we believe time truly is. If a contradiction can break the chain, then what protects the chain from breaking? There is a certain kind of mystery that deepens the more you look at it, a quiet looping shape that feels strangely familiar even the first time you encounter it. The bootstrap paradox belongs to this family of puzzles. It doesn't rely on contradictions or erased histories like the grandfather paradox. Instead, it unsettles you by presenting something far more delicate. A story with no clear beginning, no first author, no original spark. A story that seems to write itself into existence. Imagine for a moment a scientist sitting alone at a desk late at night. The room is dim, lit only by the warm glow of a small lamp. Papers are scattered around, filled with half-written equations and half-formed ideas. Suddenly a knock echoes softly at the door. When the scientist opens it, they find a small box sitting on the floor. No note, no explanation. Inside the box is a complete blueprint for a time machine, elegant and detailed in a way that leaves no doubt. Someone with extraordinary knowledge created it. Driven by curiosity, the scientist spends years building the machine exactly as described. And when it finally works, they decide to travel back in time, to the very night when the mysterious box first arrived. They place the blueprint on the doorstep, knock gently, and slip away before their younger self opens the door. The question hangs quietly in the air. Where did the blueprint come from? Not who delivered it, but who created it. It was never written for the first time. It was simply passed along a loop, existing not because someone designed it, but because time itself carried it forward and backward without ever letting it begin. This is the essence of the bootstrap paradox. It presents an object or a piece of information that has no true origin. It appears in time, persists, and loops back to cause itself. It is not a contradiction, but it defies our sense of how stories, inventions, and ideas are supposed to arise. We expect beginnings. We expect causes. We expect a spark that lights a flame. But the paradox gives us the flame without the spark. To make this idea even gentler, imagine a melody. One day, a musician hears a beautiful tune drifting through an open window. They write it down, perform it widely, and the melody becomes famous. Years later, while travelling, they pass beneath another window and hear someone inside humming the same tune, the tune they wrote. Only now, the voice humming it is much younger. As they stop to listen, they realise the younger voice is actually their own, echoed from a past moment before they ever claimed the melody as theirs. Which version came first? The older musician heard it from the younger, but the younger version learned it from the older. The melody exists because it exists. The loop closes so neatly that no beginning can be found. This is what makes the paradox so haunting. It doesn't break the logic of time, but instead circles around it in a way that accounts for every moment, yet leaves no origin. Bootstrap paradoxes can take many forms. A historian might travel back with a copy of a famous novel, give it to the original author years before it's written, and inspire that author to publish it. But who truly wrote the book? Or imagine a traveller who brings a piece of advanced technology to a past civilization, and generations later, that civilization develops the same device and sends it forward into the traveller's own time. The object becomes its own parent. These loops make us question the simplest things. What does it mean to create? What does it mean for something to be new? We often imagine time as a chain of cause and effect, with each link leading clearly to the next. But the bootstrap paradox suggests the chain can sometimes curl back on itself, forming a ring that is complete without having an open end. In physics, some interpretations gently suggest that such loops might be allowed in certain structures of space-time, places where time folds back toward an earlier moment, creating a closed circle where events reinforce one another. Scientists sometimes call these closed time-like curves, but spoken softly, they are simply paths where time travels in a loop. In these places, the universe doesn't forbid an object from causing its own existence. It simply allows a story to feed into itself, like a whispered secret passed in a circle with no beginning. This idea touches something strangely poetic. It suggests that some things in the universe could exist not because of an initial push, but because the universe itself supports their existence from all sides at once. It offers a vision of time where origins are not always required, where loops can sustain themselves with quiet elegance. But for all its beauty, the bootstrap paradox can also feel unsettling. It challenges the intuition that everything must trace back to some first moment. And because of this, it raises profound questions. If a story can write itself, then what anchors reality? If information can appear without an author, what does that mean for our understanding of truth? And if ideas can emerge from loops rather than from minds, then how does creativity truly work? Yet, there is comfort hidden inside the paradox as well. It reflects a deeper pattern woven into the universe, continuity, symmetry, and the possibility that some things exist simply because they fit so perfectly into the structure of time. The loop, though strange, is stable. It holds itself together. It remains consistent. And as this image of a self-sustaining loop settles in your thoughts, another question begins to rise gently. If something can create itself, then what does that say about the threads of destiny woven through time? There are moments when time feels less like a road we travel, and more like a story that gently guides us, nudging us toward events we don't yet understand. If the grandfather paradox questions whether we can break the chain of cause and effect, and the bootstrap paradox reveals loops without beginnings, then the predestination paradox offers something subtler, a sense that sometimes, in trying to change the future, we quietly become the very reason it unfolds the way it does. Picture a traveller who stands at the edge of a moment they regret deeply. Perhaps it's a terrible accident or a painful choice someone once made. With the help of some imagined time machine, one built from soft, shimmering possibilities rather than metal and gears, they step backward into the past with a single intention: to prevent the event from ever happening. But as they move through the familiar scene, they notice something strange. Every attempt they make, every change they introduce, every step of intervention becomes the foundation for the very outcome they hope to avoid. Maybe they rush to warn someone, only for their sudden appearance to startle that person into taking the very action that leads to the accident. Or perhaps they try to move a crucial object out of harm's way, but in doing so, place it exactly where it needs to be for the event to unfold. Their determination becomes the seed of the very future they wish to rewrite. In this paradox, the traveller is not fighting fate, they are accidentally constructing it. The predestination paradox doesn't mock us or punish us. Instead, it reveals a quiet truth. Sometimes the harder we try to push the river of time, the more firmly it channels us back into its original flow. And while this might feel like the universe resisting change, it can also be seen as the universe gently maintaining coherence, holding events together with an unseen thread. To imagine this paradox more softly, think of a circle traced in the sand. You can walk around the circle again and again, but every step you take simply reinforces the shape. Trying to erase the line by walking it only presses the groove a little deeper. In the same way, a traveller attempting to alter a destined moment may end up reinforcing it instead. Stories throughout history echo this idea. A king tries to avoid a prophecy and accidentally fulfills it. A hero attempts to save someone but becomes the reason they were in danger. A parent tries to prevent a child's difficult future, only to guide them unknowingly toward the very crossroads they feared. These tales resonate because they capture a quiet truth about life. Sometimes our most passionate attempts at control lead us into the arms of the very outcome we resist. Modern interpretations of this paradox in physics often approach it with caution because it touches the heart of the debate about free will. If every attempt to change the past only ensures its consistency, does that mean our choices are illusions? Are we simply walking along a path that has already been carved through time? But there is a gentler way to see this. Imagine time as a vast garden with winding paths. Most of the time, you are free to choose which path to follow. Yet there may be certain intersections, moments anchored deeply into the structure of your story, where no matter which direction you turn, you find yourself arriving at the same clearing. These moments feel inevitable not because every choice is predetermined, but because some events serve as structural supports holding your entire timeline together. The predestination paradox simply asks us to consider, what happens if someone tries to interfere with one of those foundational moments? Instead of collapsing or splitting, the timeline may simply redirect them, guiding every action, intentional or accidental, toward the same outcome. It isn't a cage, it's more like the last puzzle piece that must fit a certain way for the picture to remain complete. Another way to soften the idea is to imagine a book you've read many times. You might wish the characters would make different choices, turn back when they should have gone forward, or speak when they remained silent. But even if you step into the story, walking quietly alongside them, your presence might only reinforce the ending you already know. After all, the ending is what makes the story whole. Some versions of this paradox explore a deeper possibility, that the traveller's attempt to change the past was always part of the original timeline. Their future actions were already woven into the fabric of the story, just waiting for their cue. In that view, the paradox vanishes. The traveller doesn't alter the story. They fulfill the role it always required. They become both the cause and the effect, a single thread looped through 2 points in time. This idea can feel comforting in a strange way. It suggests that some moments in our lives are not mistakes or missteps, but quiet necessities, anchor points that shape who we become. And while the paradox plays with time on a cosmic scale, its emotional truth is something we encounter every day. Think of a choice you made long ago that felt small at the time, but later revealed itself to be crucial. Think of moments where your attempts to avoid something only drew you closer to it. These experiences are not paradoxes, but reflections of the same gentle pattern. As this understanding settles, we begin to see time not as a rigid sequence, but as a tapestry whose threads sometimes loop back on one another. And within those loops, we find stories that feel both inevitable and strangely beautiful. Stories where cause and effect dance together so closely that it becomes impossible to see which one leads. And in that softly lit space between choice and destiny, a new question begins to rise. If some paths cannot be altered, what does the universe do to protect them? There is a certain calm that settles over the mind when a difficult idea is expressed with clarity, and the principle of self-consistency is one of those ideas. Though it began as a mathematical proposal in theoretical physics, it carries a softness at its core, a kind of quiet reassurance that the universe, for all its strangeness, does not allow itself to unravel. Instead, it bends gently toward coherence, as though time itself has a way of smoothing out contradictions before they ever arise. To understand this principle without any symbols or equations, imagine time not as a straight line or a loop, but as a series of moments woven together like threads in a blanket. The blanket can shift, stretch, or fold, but it cannot permit a tear. A tear would mean a moment that contradicts its own cause, a piece of fabric that insists it should not exist at the same time that it does. The principle of self-consistency is simply the universe's way of preventing such tears. The idea becomes easier to sense when told through a simple, almost playful story. Imagine a traveller who uses some quiet, impossible machine to step backward in time. Their goal is dramatic. They wish to change a major event. Maybe they want to prevent a discovery, stop a meeting, or alter the course of their own childhood. They walk into the past with a mind full of determination. But when they arrive, something curious happens. Each attempt they make, no matter how clever or unexpected, fails in a way that feels strangely natural. A door jams, a letter gets lost, a coincidence interrupts their plan. It is as though time gently places a hand on their shoulder and steers them away from actions that would create a contradiction. This is not fate in the mythical sense. It is consistency. The traveller cannot create a version of the past that would prevent them from making the journey they are currently on. Their plan collides not with destiny, but with logical coherence. The universe simply cannot permit an event that invalidates its own cause. The most famous way this principle is illustrated in physics is through what is sometimes called the billiard ball example, though here we'll translate it softly so that it can be imagined without noise or complexity. Picture a quiet room with a small, perfectly smooth table. The table has a circular opening, like the mouth of a small tunnel, leading to another identical room. This tunnel represents a shortcut through time, a gentle loop where a ball could roll into one moment and emerge in another, slightly earlier moment. Now imagine a small ball rolling toward the opening. If nothing interferes, it will pass through the tunnel, arrive in the past and emerge just in time to collide with itself. But here is the twist. The ball would have to hit itself in just the right way to prevent its younger version from entering the tunnel. And if that happened, then the ball wouldn't enter the tunnel at all, which means it wouldn't emerge to hit itself. The contradiction seems inevitable, unless something subtler happens. What the principle of self-consistency suggests is that the ball will not strike itself hard enough to prevent its own entry. Instead, it might bump itself gently, nudging its path by just enough so that the younger version rolls into the tunnel at a slightly altered angle, an angle that leads to the very collision the older version just experienced. The loop remains perfectly consistent. The event sustains itself. No contradiction forms and no moment unravels. Translated into everyday imagery, it's like watching someone try to stop their past self from making a mistake, only to end up being the reason it happened exactly the way they remember it. The loop might seem strange, but it is whole. It does not break. The principle of self-consistency does not say that time travel is real or that loops exist in our universe. Instead, it says that if such loops exist, if time can bend back onto itself, then only the events that preserve consistency can occur. Anything that would create a contradiction simply fails to happen. Not explosively, not dramatically, just quietly, subtly, effortlessly. What makes this idea so comforting is the way it reflects something we already know from life. There are moments when we try to fight the natural flow of events, only to discover that everything gently redirects us toward a certain outcome, not out of fate or mysticism, but because some patterns simply need to hold together for the story to make sense. You cannot become someone new without passing through the version of yourself that led you there. You cannot stand in a moment that contradicts the steps that brought you to it. This principle also shifts our view of paradoxes. The grandfather paradox, for example, becomes less of an impossibility and more of a misunderstanding. Under the principle of self-consistency, you can travel to the past, but you cannot alter the conditions that made your journey possible. You can observe, interact, even influence, but only in ways that keep the story intact. The universe would not allow you to erase yourself, because your presence in the past is already part of the tapestry. The thread you represent was woven long before you realized it. This idea opens a gentle door to deeper reflections. If time protects its own coherence, then perhaps our lives reflect a similar pattern. Perhaps certain encounters, choices, or turning points are anchored into the structure of our personal timelines. Not inevitable in the sense of destiny, but necessary in the sense of meaning. They support the story we become. And as the idea of self-consistency settles into place, another question drifts quietly forward. If the universe preserves the structure of time so carefully, what happens when something tries to bend it in a way that goes too far? The answer lies in another idea, kind of cosmic safeguard, that watches over the fabric of time with quiet vigilance. There is a certain comfort in imagining that the universe, for all its vastness and mystery, possesses a quiet instinct for self-preservation. The principle of self-consistency suggests that contradictions simply do not happen, that the fabric of time bends toward coherence. But as physicists reflected on this idea, another question began to rise softly. What if something tried to bend time so sharply that a contradiction became unavoidable? What if an ambitious civilization or a curious traveller attempted to build a machine capable of rewriting history in a way that would unravel the story of the universe itself? This question led to a gentle but profound idea, proposed by Stephen Hawking, often called the chronology protection conjecture. But instead of presenting it with complex terminology, we can think of it as a simple thought. Perhaps time has a guardian, an invisible caretaker that quietly prevents reality from tearing open. To imagine this guardian, picture time as a vast, shimmering lake. Most ripples are gentle and predictable. Waves ebb and flow in a rhythm that feels natural. But suppose someone attempted to create a whirlpool so intense that it would drag part of the lake backward, pulling one moment into the place where another moment should be. In the earliest models of theoretical physics, such whirlpools seemed possible, regions where the fabric of time looped back on itself, letting events return to their own past. These loops, when described in equations, were called closed paths through time, but we can describe them more gently. They are little curls in the fabric where time turns around and looks at itself. And while such loops create fascinating possibilities, they also create trouble. A loop that connects a moment to its own earlier self can be stable and self-consistent, but it can also invite contradictions, and contradictions, as the universe seems to hint, are unwelcome guests. This is where Hawking's idea enters with quiet authority. He proposed that whenever conditions arise that might create one of these dangerous loops so extreme they could allow a traveller to alter the past, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Tiny fluctuations in the fabric of space, usually too faint to notice, suddenly grow intense. You can imagine them as soft static in the background of reality, a little shimmer in the air. Normally this shimmer is gentle, like dust caught in a sunbeam. But near one of these extreme time-bending regions, the shimmer intensifies, the air hums, the fabric trembles. If one were to translate Hawking's insight into imagery, it might look like this. Time begins to defend itself. The closer you get to creating a paradox, something that would tear the lake of time into unruly whirlpools, the more fiercely the shimmer swirls until the entire region becomes unstable. The whirlpool collapses. The path loops shut. The contradiction is prevented before it ever breathes. Hawking called this idea chronology protection, as though the universe has built-in safeguards that keep history intact. But he never meant that time is guarded by intention or consciousness. Instead, he meant that the laws of nature, when pushed toward contradiction, naturally push back. Space and time simply refuse to cooperate. To make this even gentler, imagine trying to push two magnets together in the wrong direction. The closer they get, the stronger the resistance becomes, not because the magnets want to resist, but because they are built that way. Chronology protection is similar. Try to bend time too sharply, and the resistance increases until the bending becomes impossible. This idea has a subtle beauty. It suggests that while time may allow small curiosities, little ripples where clocks tick at different speeds, or where loops remain consistent, it will not allow the universe to trap itself in contradictions. A civilization might build extraordinary machines, but when they reach the point of tearing history into conflicting shapes, the universe simply folds the plan back into itself. Chronology protection doesn't forbid all time travel, at least not in a gentle interpretation. It simply prevents the kind that leads to impossible situations. It's as if time says, you may observe, you may move, you may even bend me softly, but you may not break me. This raises an interesting emotional parallel. In life, we often encounter boundaries that feel frustrating, yet later reveal themselves as safeguards, limits that kept us from stepping into situations we weren't ready for. Sometimes the universe holds us back not with force, but with fragility. A coincidence closes a door. A delay changes our path. A chance event prevents us from making a mistake we might not even recognize until much later. Chronology protection echoes that quiet wisdom, the idea that certain things simply must remain whole. There is something reassuring in knowing that even if advanced civilizations existed somewhere in the vastness of space, civilizations more capable and technologically daring than our own, they might still face the same gentle barriers. The universe is not a puzzle waiting to be broken, a part but a story held together by invisible threads. And while its pages may be flexible, they're also durable. They bend but do not tear. Hawking once joked that chronology protection exists to make the universe safe for historians, but beneath the humour lies a deep truth. A universe without chronology protection would be a universe where events could overwrite themselves in chaotic spirals, where causes could vanish beneath their effects, and where the past could not be trusted to remain the past. Instead, what we observe is consistency. Events unfold, memories remain anchored, the story continues. And as this gentle guardian of time takes shape in your mind, a new question begins to shimmer softly. If the universe protects its own history so faithfully, what other ways might there be for time to bend? Ways that avoid contradiction entirely? The answer lies in the strange beauty of tunnels through space, and gentle shortcuts through the fabric of the universe. There's a gentle thrill in imagining that somewhere in the vastness of the universe, hidden between stars and drifting quietly through darkness, there might be pathways that bend space and time into shapes we can hardly imagine. These pathways, often called wormholes in scientific discussions, are sometimes presented with sharp diagrams or dense notation. But in truth, the idea can be understood softly, without equations, like a story whispered late at night, where space becomes a sheet of paper and time becomes a delicate fold. Imagine holding a smooth piece of paper in your hands. If you draw two dots far apart on the page, the most obvious way to travel between them is to glide your finger along the surface from one to the other. But if you gently bend the paper, curving its edges until the two dots touch, suddenly the journey becomes effortless. The long path collapses into a single point. Distance shrinks. Space softens. In scientific language, this bending of the paper is a metaphor for how the universe might curve and fold. But spoken softly, it simply means that space is not as rigid as we once believed. If it can fold, then two distant regions might connect through a short hidden tunnel, a wormhole, linking moments and locations as though they are neighbours. Now imagine walking through a forest and finding a hollow tree that seems deeper on the inside than it is on the outside. You step in expecting darkness, but instead find a narrow tunnel that opens into a distant meadow, one you've only ever seen in dreams. The entrance and the exit are worlds apart, yet they're connected through a single, unexpected passage. This is the feeling a wormhole carries, a gentle surprise built into the fabric of space. The idea of using a wormhole as a shortcut through space is already breathtaking, but when scientists asked what would happen if the two entrances experienced time differently, something even stranger emerged. If one end of the tunnel were carried on a long journey, perhaps orbiting near a massive star where time flows more slowly, and then returned, the two ends would no longer agree about what time it is. One might be slightly younger than the other. One might experience more moments than its partner. The tunnel, still connecting them, would now link two different moments in time. In soft language, this means that a wormhole could become a tiny bridge not only through space, but through time itself. This idea enters the realm of time travel, but gently, without the harshness of paradox or contradiction. Stepping into one end of the tunnel might bring you not only to a faraway place, but to a moment that unfolded earlier or later. The tunnel becomes a thread stitched between two different folds of the cosmic fabric, allowing someone to drift between them as easily as crossing a curtain. But before imagining the possibilities, it's helpful to picture how delicate such a tunnel would be. Astronomers and physicists often describe wormholes as fragile structures, like soap bubbles that shimmer beautifully yet burst when touched. They require unusual conditions to remain open, regions where space behaves in almost ethereal ways. In scientific papers, these conditions are described with terms like negative pressure or exotic energy. But spoken softly, it simply means this: wormholes are gentle things that cannot endure rough handling. They survive only when the universe cradles them with extraordinary care. For a moment, imagine blowing a delicate bubble. It floats effortlessly, catching tiny rainbows on its surface, but a single breath too strong or a single fingertip applied with too much pressure collapses it instantly. A wormhole, if it exists, might be just as fragile, something that flickers more than it persists, appearing only under conditions that nature rarely maintains for long. This fragility offers a comforting boundary. While wormholes are beautiful to imagine, they are not easily manipulated. The universe does not hand us shortcuts lightly. If a wormhole were ever discovered or created, its delicacy would likely prevent anyone from using it to create contradictions or unravel the story of time itself. It would be a doorway that appears only when the universe allows and vanishes the moment it is pushed too far. Yet there is something soothing in thinking about these tunnels in a non-scientific way. They resemble those quiet turning points in life, unexpected openings that appear just when they are needed, offering a path to somewhere new. A chance meeting that shifts your direction, a conversation that opens a door, a kind gesture that becomes a bridge. These wormhole-like moments are brief, delicate, and easily overlooked, but they connect distant parts of our story in ways we often understand only in hindsight. The scientific idea of a wormhole may be wrapped in equations in textbooks, but the heart of the idea is poetic. The universe might contain hidden passages, soft folds in its vast tapestry, and just as we encounter gentle connections in our relationships and experiences, the cosmos itself might hold connections woven from the same spirit. Quiet, fleeting, but profoundly meaningful. As we let the idea of wormholes settle, we begin to sense a larger pattern forming. Time and space are not rigid grids, but responsive landscapes. They bend, curve, stretch, and sometimes even loop back toward themselves. And if the universe offers shortcuts through space, it may also offer pathways that lead into parallel possibilities, worlds shaped by choices we did or did not make. And with that soft shifting of thought, we drift toward the idea of branching universes and the endless tapestry of worlds that might exist just beyond the veil of our own. There is a special kind of wonder that rises when you imagine the universe not as a single, unfolding story, but as a vast tapestry woven from countless possibilities. Each thread represents a choice, a moment, a direction life could take. Some threads weave close to one another, moving in gentle harmony. Others drift apart like quiet echoes of decisions you did not make. This idea, often described in physics as the many worlds view, sounds complex when dressed in equations, but when spoken softly it becomes something simple and almost tender, a universe made of choices. To begin sensing this idea, imagine standing in front of a still pond. You pick up a pebble and gently toss it into the water. As it sinks beneath the surface, a ring of ripples expands outward. Now imagine tossing a handful of pebbles. Each one creates ripples that overlap, blend, or pass through one another. Each ripple is like a path your life could follow. Some ripples strengthen each other. Others drift away. None of them erase the others. They simply exist, each tracing its own quiet circle. This is one way to picture the many worlds idea. Each moment, each tiny decision sends out ripples into the pond of existence. You follow one ripple, but the others still spread outward in the background, forming patterns you'll never walk across, but which nonetheless exist in the soft imagination of the universe. In this gentle vision, time travel becomes something different from the paradoxes we've explored. Instead of returning to your own past to rewrite it, you step sideways into a nearby ripple, a nearby thread, where events unfolded differently. You do not overwrite your past, because your past is anchored in the thread you came from. Instead, you simply enter a version of the past where you were never present in the first place. The story there has its own rhythm, its own branches, its own moments waiting quietly for you to arrive. Imagine, for instance, a traveller who regrets a small decision from years ago. A phone call not made, an opportunity declined, a tender moment missed. In a single thread universe, the past is sealed. But in a universe of many threads, somewhere, there is a version of that traveller who did make the call, who did embrace the opportunity, who followed the path woven from courage rather than hesitation. In the many worlds view, both stories exist side by side, like two pages in a book tucked closely together. Now imagine a gentle step sideways, into that other page, not to replace your own story, but to glimpse the echo of what might have been. This way of thinking about time travel removes the sharpness of paradox. There is no contradiction, because you're not altering the past that formed you. You're simply visiting a past that belongs to a parallel version of your life. It is as if the universe says, every choice you could have made has already been made somewhere. Every path you might have taken has already been walked. And the many worlds view simply allows a traveller to drift among those paths, exploring their quiet variety. Of course, this idea can feel overwhelming when presented with technical detail, with unfamiliar words like amplitude and branching wave. But we don't need any of that here. Instead, we use gentle images, threads in a tapestry, ripples in a pond, pages in a book that have always existed but were never turned to. These images touch the heart of the idea without weighing the mind down. If we look for echoes of this concept in life, we don't need to go far. Every moment you hesitate, wondering how things might have turned out, you're brushing lightly against the edge of another path. Every time you replay a memory with, "What if I had chosen differently?" you're feeling the soft pull of a parallel possibility. These questions don't need scientific machinery. They arise naturally in anyone who reflects on the delicate branches of their life. In a way, the many worlds idea does not create new mysteries. It simply gives shape to the ones already living inside us. Now consider another gentle view. Imagine the universe as a great loom. Each person's life is a thread running across it. When you make a choice, your thread doesn't split violently. It simply touches a neighbouring thread, either weaving alongside it or drifting apart. The loom keeps weaving, the pattern grows, and somewhere else on the vast fabric, threads representing different choices continue weaving in their own direction. When someone in these speculative models travels through time, they're not tearing their thread out of the fabric. They're following a neighbouring thread, one that diverged long ago. The past there is familiar, but not quite the same. The people look similar, but their lives have unfolded with subtle differences. Even the traveller themselves may exist there in another form, a version shaped by different moments, different accidents of choice and chance. And this brings us to one of the gentlest and most intriguing implications of the many worlds idea. You may not be alone in the universe, not because of alien civilizations, but because of the quiet echoes of yourself spread across the tapestry of possibilities, each one shaped by a different memory, a different hope, a different heartbreak. The idea doesn't claim these worlds are real or reachable. It merely invites us to imagine the scope of possibility. It suggests that the story of time may not be a single melody, but a chorus of harmonies drifting through the cosmos. As you let this image settle, the tapestry, the pond, the neighbouring threads, a soft realisation begins to form. If worlds can branch from choices, then perhaps some of these worlds stayed loosely connected, like ripples that overlap briefly before drifting apart again. And with that thought, we move gently toward the notion of timelines that sometimes hum in resonance with each other, where parallel worlds remember one another in quiet, mysterious ways. There is a moment, after imagining a universe woven from many possible threads, when another question arises almost naturally. If countless timelines stretch outward like branches of a vast cosmic tree, each one growing in its own quiet direction, could some of those branches ever brush against one another? Could there be rare moments, gentle, fleeting, when two different versions of reality hum the same soft note? This is the spirit behind the idea of entangled timelines, a phrase inspired by recent scientific speculation but far gentler when described in imagery. Instead of thinking about formulas, we can imagine two wind chimes hanging at opposite ends of a long porch. Most of the time, each one sings its own melody, shaped by its own breeze, but occasionally a gust sweeps through the space between them, causing both to ring the same delicate tone at the same moment. They do not touch, yet they resonate together. In a similar way, some scientists have wondered whether parallel timelines, if they exist, might subtly reflect or influence each other under certain conditions. Not in dramatic ways, not in ways that rewrite history, or allow messages to pass between worlds, but in quiet ripples that echo across the branches of possibility. To make this easier to picture, imagine two versions of you living in two different universes. In one world, you chose to stay in your hometown. In another, you moved away. Your lives diverged. Your friends, your jobs, your memories, they all branched like different trails in a forest. But suppose there's a moment years later when both versions of you pause at the same time to watch the sunset. Not because of fate or magic, but because the moment feels natural, familiar, comforting, even if the circumstances leading to that moment were completely different. This would be a gentle example of an entangled moment, a tiny resonance between lives shaped by different choices. It does not break any rules of physics. It does not imply communication between worlds. It is simply a poetic way to imagine how similar emotional or physical patterns might emerge across different branches of reality. Some scientific ideas proposed in recent years attempt to describe these resonances using the language of quantum behavior, where particles can be linked in such a way that their states correspond across distances. But quantum language, filled with symbols and probabilities, can feel sharp and restless. For our quiet journey, it's enough to translate the idea into an image, threads of a tapestry that occasionally vibrate at the same frequency, even though they belong to different patterns. If parallel universes are like chapters of an unwritten book, then entangled timelines are the moments where two pages, though separated, carry the same word at the same place in a sentence. A coincidence, yes, but one that feels meaningful. There are stories people tell, small, personal stories, that echo this idea. Someone dreams of a place they've never been, only to discover later that it matches a city they eventually visit, down to the shape of a particular alley. Someone feels a sudden pull of emotion, a quiet sadness or joy, without knowing why, only to hear later that a loved one experienced something significant at that same moment. These experiences are not proof of entangled timelines, but they hint at how the human heart is always searching for connections across the invisible distances of time and possibility. In our journey tonight, we approach entangled timelines not as scientific claims, but as tools for imagination, ways to soften the edges of paradox. Think back to the contradictions posed by time travel. Under the many worlds view, paradox is dissolved because each action simply leads to another branch. But entangled timelines offer another gentle perspective. Instead of viewing timelines as entirely separated, we imagine them brushing lightly against one another, sharing faint vibrations that help maintain a kind of cosmic harmony. This does not mean timelines merge or interfere. Instead, they behave like parallel rivers that sometimes share a breeze. The water does not mix, yet both respond to the same wind. Now, imagine a traveller, someone who has stepped from one timeline into a nearby one. Their arrival might create ripples in that world, but those ripples might still align with patterns that already existed. The traveller would not break the story of the timeline they've entered. They would simply join it at a moment that allows for coherence. The paradox, instead of being a threat, becomes a connecting point where two branches resonate gently. In this soft interpretation, paradoxes are not errors but bridges, places where two threads touch briefly before drifting apart again. You can walk across those bridges for a moment, appreciate the view, and step back without disturbing the structure around you. This idea brings a sense of peace to the complexity of time. It allows the universe to hold its shape while still embracing possibility. It tells us that the fabric of reality may not be divided into strict separate pieces, but may instead be woven from threads that occasionally hum together in harmony. Emotionally, the idea of entangled timelines resonates because it mirrors something we often feel in our own lives. We sense connections to places we have not visited, to people we have not met, to possibilities we did not choose. We feel echoes of paths we did not take. We carry memories of alternate versions of ourselves, not literally, but through imagination and intuition. These feelings are not evidence of parallel universes, but they reflect the same longing to understand the vastness of who we might be. As this idea drifts through your thoughts, another question begins to take shape. If timelines can resonate gently, what might it feel like to encounter a version of yourself from one of those neighbouring worlds? Not in a dramatic collision, but in a quiet, reflective moment, like two ripples touching on the surface of a pond. The answer lies in the soft, surreal experience of meeting your parallel self. There is a gentle strangeness in imagining a universe where countless versions of you exist, each shaped by choices you made, choices you avoided, and even choices you never realised were yours to make. Most of the time, these parallel selves feel like distant possibilities, soft echoes we sense only when we wonder how life might have unfolded differently. But if the many worlds view holds even a grain of truth, then the paths you did not walk still stretch outward in other worlds, quietly supporting other versions of your story. So what would it feel like, not in a dramatic collision of universes, but in a quiet, contemplative moment, to meet a parallel self? To begin sensing this, imagine sitting alone in a small, dimly lit room. The air is still. The walls absorb the quiet. The only light comes from a candle flickering gently on a wooden table. You sit there, aware of all the moments that led you to this room, your memories, your triumphs, your regrets. Then softly, as though carried by a breeze from another world, the door opens. A figure steps inside. They look familiar, achingly so. Not identical, but close enough that your mind recognises them instantly. Their posture is slightly different, as if shaped by burdens you never carried. Their eyes hold a shade of experience you do not possess. Their voice, when they speak, sounds like yours, but softened by a life you never lived. This is your parallel self, someone who walked a branch of the timeline you only imagined. The encounter is not chaotic. There is no rupture, no distortion, no trembling of space. Instead, it feels strangely natural, like meeting an old friend you've been remembering without realising it. The two of you sit together in quiet understanding, the room becoming a meeting point between two threads of reality. The parallel self you meet could be someone who made one brave decision at a moment when you hesitated, or they could be someone who hesitated at a moment when you stepped forward. They might carry the weight of a loss you never experienced, or the joy of a chance they embraced. They are not better or worse. They are simply shaped by a different rhythm of choices, a different sequence of gentle accidents. One of the most profound elements of this imagined encounter is how it shifts the question of identity. We often see ourselves as the sum of the choices we made, but meeting a parallel self suggests something deeper. Perhaps we're also the sum of choices we could have made. Perhaps identity is not a single path, but a region, a soft cloud of possibilities, with each version of us expressing a different shade of who we might be. In such a meeting, you might be tempted to ask the parallel self what their life is like, but instead, imagine beginning with something simpler, something calm and human, a moment of looking into their eyes. In that stillness, you notice that despite all the differences, a familiar core remains, an echo of who you are underneath the shifting patterns of experience. This encounter also brings forward a quieter question. If you could speak to this alternate self, what would you ask them? Would you ask what they regret, what they fear, what they cherish? Or perhaps you would ask something gentler, like whether they ever think of you, just as you have thought of them during moments of reflection, nostalgia, or uncertainty. In this soft imagining, the parallel self becomes a mirror held at an angle, reflecting not only what you are, but what you might have become. They reveal the flexibility of identity, the branching nature of destiny, and the subtle interplay between choice and circumstance. The many worlds view suggests that time travel may not mean changing your own past, but stepping into the past of a nearby timeline where your presence was never part of the story. Meeting your parallel self in such a world would not break anything. It would not unravel history. It would simply be an encounter, two threads brushing against each other in the grand tapestry of possibility. There's a certain emotional tenderness in this idea. Imagine sitting with a version of yourself who made a painful decision you avoided. You might feel compassion for them. Or imagine meeting a version of yourself who pursued a dream you set aside. You might feel a quiet pride that somewhere in the universe that dream lived. Such an encounter, while speculative, mirrors something we already experience in daily life. Every time you reflect on a moment of regret, you're reaching toward a parallel self, the one who made a different choice. Every time you imagine how your life could have unfolded, you're brushing against the possibility of another you. These moments are not mistakes or delusions. They are gentle reminders that your identity is larger than the narrow corridor of time you walk through. In a way, we meet our parallel selves often, just not physically. We meet them in our memories, in our hopes, in our fears, in the soft contemplation of who we are and who we might yet become. The many worlds idea simply gives shape to these feelings, suggesting that the universe may hold more than one version of your story. And as this thought settles, another begins to rise, like a ripple expanding across a calm lake. If each choice can lead to a different world, and if each world carries its own version of you, then even the smallest actions might echo far beyond the moment they are made. This gentle realization leads us to the next part of our journey, the butterfly's whisper, where tiny ripples become vast futures. There is something deeply soothing about watching water settle after a small disturbance. A pebble tossed gently into a pond, a leaf falling from a branch, or the soft tip of your finger brushing the surface. The ripples begin small, almost imperceptible, and then widen outward in rings that grow larger and fainter, until they finally blend back into stillness. And yet, even though the pond looks unchanged in the end, for a brief moment the entire surface reshaped itself around that single touch. This is the quiet heart of what people often call the butterfly effect, though here we'll speak about it softly, without the sharpness of scientific jargon. Instead of imagining chaotic equations or complex systems, picture something simple. A leaf drifting down onto a slow-moving stream. It lands lightly, barely disturbing the water. But as the leaf floats, it nudges the current just enough to shift a small twig, which then bumps into a cluster of floating seeds, which then alter their path by just a hair. Downstream, far beyond the place where the leaf first touched, the flow of the stream becomes slightly different. Maybe only by a fraction. Maybe only for a moment, but different nonetheless. In the context of time, this idea becomes even more delicate. Imagine stepping back into the past, not with the intention of moving mountains, but simply wandering through a quiet street, accidentally nudging a pebble with your foot. To you, it's nothing. A gesture so small it barely registers in your memory. But that pebble rolls half an inch into the path of a passing cart. The cart veers slightly to avoid it. A pedestrian steps aside. A conversation is delayed by one breath. A letter that would have been handed off at that exact moment is instead delivered a few seconds later, changing which messenger carries it, which rider receives it, which official reads it first. And from that tiny delay, the future ripples outward in patterns nobody could ever fully trace. This is not the dramatic, changing history of movies. It is the quiet truth that every moment depends on 1,000 tiny conditions, many so small we never notice them. When we talk about the butterfly effect, what we really describe is sensitivity, the way small beginnings can grow into large endings, not through magic or force, but through the gentle accumulation of influences. Think of your own life. There may have been times when you missed a bus by a single second. Perhaps you turned a corner just a moment too soon or too late. Maybe you chose one cafe over another, not because of a grand reason, but because the light from the window caught your eye. And from that small moment, someone walked into your life or stayed out of it. A job opportunity emerged. A friendship began. A path shifted, not from a dramatic choice, but from a tiny, accidental pause. This is the butterfly effect already at work, not in equations, but in everyday living. And now imagine layering time travel onto this fragile web of chance. What happens when a traveller steps into a moment that was never meant to include them? Even if they try their best not to interfere, the mere presence of a new breath, a new footstep, a new shadow cast on a wall becomes a ripple that wasn't originally part of the scene. A bird shifts its flight path because it senses movement. A child pauses to watch the traveller's strange clothes. A kettle boils for 1 second longer because someone was distracted by a sound that wasn't meant to be there. And these tiny disturbances, once folded into the delicate machinery of events, spread outward with quiet persistence. This is why stories about time travel often speak of the fragility of the past. It's not that the past is sacred or untouchable. It's that the past is intricate, woven from moments so small that even the smallest shift can echo into the future in ways we cannot predict. And while the many worlds view offers one way to soften this effect, by suggesting that each ripple simply forms a new branch, the butterfly's whisper still reminds us how sensitive our world is to the gentlest changes. But the butterfly effect is not only a cautionary idea, it also carries a hopeful message. If tiny actions can reshape the flow of time, then perhaps our small acts of kindness, curiosity and courage matter more than we realise. A smile offered to a stranger might influence the arc of their day in ways you never see. A moment of patience might prevent a conflict. A spark of inspiration might plant a seed that grows into something larger than you could ever imagine. The future, like a river, responds to these subtle currents. Even in your own memories, you may feel the echo of small events that shifted everything. A teacher's remark that nudged you toward a passion. A chance encounter that reshaped your goals. A sentence from a book that stayed with you long after the page was turned. None of these felt monumental at the time, yet they rippled outward, aligning your steps in ways that eventually defined who you became. These everyday experiences mirror the very essence of the butterfly effect. The quiet truth that large futures can grow from small beginnings. Now imagine this principle applied to a traveller moving through time. Instead of asking whether they could change the world in dramatic ways, we might ask something gentler. What if their smallest touch does the most? Perhaps they inspire a poet with an accidental phrase. Perhaps they delay a meeting by a heartbeat. Perhaps their unfamiliar presence plants a seed of curiosity in a child, a curiosity that blossoms into discoveries centuries later. This reimagining of time travel transforms it from a vehicle of chaos into a surprisingly tender process, one where tiny ripples reshape destinies not through force, but through the quiet, intricate sensitivity of existence. As this idea settles into your thoughts, a deeper question begins to form. If the past can be shaped by tiny actions, then what happens when a traveller steps into the past with intention? What happens when those small ripples grow into waves that divide not only events, but entire worlds? And with that gentle transition, we drift toward the idea of time itself becoming a powerful amplifier of chaos, where a small change does not merely shift a moment, but reshapes the entire tapestry of reality. There is a moment when thinking about the butterfly effect, when the mind naturally drifts towards something larger. If a tiny ripple can shift the future in subtle and unpredictable ways, then what happens when a traveller moves through the past not by accident, but with intention? What happens when a single presence, a stranger stepping into a moment they were never meant to occupy, becomes the first leaf falling not onto a quiet stream but onto a river already rushing with possibilities? To sense this, imagine opening a book you've read many times. You turn to a familiar chapter, expecting the same comforting sentences you know by heart. But now picture changing a single line, just one. Perhaps you replace a quiet sentence with a different one, or remove a phrase entirely. At first, nothing dramatic seems to shift. But as you read onward, the tone begins to drift. A character hesitates where they were once certain. A conversation lands with a slightly different emotion. A later scene feels heavier or lighter than you remembered. One line, one subtle change, has begun to rewrite entire chapters. Time is similar. A small shift in the past might drift outward, reshaping everything downstream. And when someone travels through time, even the smallest presence, one unexpected breath, one changed footstep, one curious glance, can act like that altered sentence, rippling through events in ways that the traveller cannot foresee. But when a traveller arrives with intention, the effect grows even more delicate. Imagine someone stepping into the past with the goal of helping, of preventing a mistake, or of nudging history in a better direction. Their heart may be kind, their motives sincere, but time is a complex tapestry, and every thread is woven into countless others. Pull one thread too firmly and the entire pattern trembles. This trembling, magnified by the structure of time itself, turns small changes into amplified outcomes. A traveller might choose to save a single life, only to discover that the saved person later influences events in ways no one could predict, perhaps starting a movement or silencing one. Their survival becomes a stone dropped into a lake whose farthest ripples touch shores the traveller never imagined. A message delivered early or late can alter an entire chain of trust, resentment, or inspiration. A child who overhears a single sentence spoken by a time traveller, something that was never meant to be said, might carry that sentence into adulthood, shaping decisions that extend far beyond the traveller's reach. And yet, none of this is chaotic in a frightening sense. Instead, it reveals the sensitivity of the universe, the way it listens, responds, and adjusts to the slightest disruptions. When someone walks into the past, they don't simply join a scene, they reshape it. Their presence is like a breeze that redirects the smoke of a candle, or a shift in weight that changes the balance of a bridge. The past is not fragile, but it is intricate. It was built moment by moment, through the interactions of countless lives, each influencing the next. Imagine a traveller stepping into a bustling marketplace centuries ago. They move quietly, hoping to avoid attention. But a vendor glances up, noticing their unusual clothing. A customer sees the vendor's distraction and hurries away without buying anything. The vendor earns a little less that day. That night, they decide to take a different route home. On that route, they meet someone they would not have met otherwise, someone who becomes important in their life. From that meeting, a family line shifts, a decision shifts, a legacy shifts. The traveller intended nothing, yet their presence amplified through the delicate machinery of events. This is the essence of time travel as a chaos amplifier, a gentle, poetic way of saying that the past is sensitive to even the softest touch, not because it is unstable, but because it is deeply connected. Each moment nourishes the next, and when a traveller steps into that web of interconnected moments, the web stretches to accommodate them, but not without changing shape. There is an emotional side to this idea as well. When we think of the past, we often look back at moments we wish we could change, words we wish we had spoken, or moments when silence might have been kinder. But the chaos amplifier reminds us that the past is not a series of isolated incidents. It is a living landscape where every choice resonates through time. Changing one moment would change countless others, many of which gave rise to the people we love, the values we carry, or the lessons that shaped us. Regret often comes from imagining a different path, one where a painful event never happened, but when, viewed through the lens of amplified ripples, we begin to see that removing the painful moment might also erase the strength, compassion, or wisdom that grew from it. Nostalgia reflects something similar, a longing for a version of ourselves or our lives that we can no longer reach. Yet even the longing shapes us, becoming a quiet current that influences the choices we make today. Time travel amplifies these emotional truths. A traveller trying to soften a painful moment of their own past might inadvertently remove the very lessons that shaped them. A traveller hoping to repair a sorrow might erase the growth that emerged from it. The chaos amplifier does not forbid these changes, but it does remind us of their weight. Still, within this sensitivity lies something hopeful. If small acts can reshape the future, then every gentle choice we make might echo farther than we realise. A kind word offered quietly can ripple outward through families, friendships, and communities. A moment of empathy can influence someone else's choices, which then ripple further. The chaos amplifier, when viewed from this angle, becomes less a warning and more a reminder, an invitation to act with care, knowing that even our smallest gestures carry meaning. And as this thought settles, another begins to rise. If time is so sensitive to small changes, then perhaps we're already travelling through it in subtle yet powerful ways, not by stepping into the past, but by shaping the future with every breath, every decision, every act of presence. And this realization leads us gently into the next part of our journey, the understanding that we are, in our own quiet way, time travellers already. Long before anyone imagined machines built of polished metal or spiralling tunnels of light, we were already moving through time in our own quiet way, not with gears or engines, but with memory, imagination, and the fragile architecture of the human mind. In fact, you have likely travelled backward and forward through time many times today, without noticing the gentle leaps your thoughts were making. You can sit perfectly still in a room, surrounded by stillness, and yet your inner world drifts from the past to the future, then back again, like a lantern carried through different halls of your own history. To begin sensing this, imagine closing your eyes for a moment. Without any effort, a memory rises, not as a frozen photograph, but as a full scene. You see the colours of a particular morning. You hear a voice you haven't heard in years. You smell the faint hint of rain on a day long vanished. You're not imagining the memory. You are in it, in the way a traveller steps through a doorway. Your heartbeat slows or quickens depending on the emotion tied to that memory, as though your body itself has wandered into that earlier moment. In this way, the mind does something profound. It lets you revisit a time that no longer exists. Scientists sometimes describe this as mental time travel, but when put softly, it simply means you carry with you a lantern that can illuminate the corridors of your past. Each time you recall something vividly, the expression on a loved one's face, the feeling of holding someone's hand, the weight of a decision, the lantern lights up that moment again, even though the world around you has changed. Your memory does not recreate the event perfectly, it reveals the emotional truth you carried from it. And in that truth, time becomes fluid. Just as the past comes alive through memory, the future arrives through imagination. Think of a moment when you pictured an upcoming day, perhaps a gathering with friends, a project you hope to complete, or the calm of a weekend morning. In imagining it, you stepped forward into a possibility that had not yet formed. You built the scene from fragments of hope, expectation, and quiet anticipation. For a brief moment, you lived in that future, testing its shape, feeling its emotional temperature. And this too is a kind of time travel, not toward what was, but toward what might be. Your mind performs this journey with incredible ease. While memory draws from what you have lived, imagination draws from what you desire, fear, or dream. Both operate within the same mental space, as though the past and future exist on shelves in a library you can walk through at will. The brain, in a gentle and mysterious way, connects these shelves through networks of neurons tuned to experience, emotion, and expectation. There's no need for symbols or technical maps to understand it. The experience is already familiar to anyone who has ever paused to remember or hope. But there is a deeper layer to this quiet travel. Sometimes, the mind touches moments so vividly that they feel almost connected, like threads that stretch between distant points in your life. You may recall something from childhood and suddenly feel as though a part of that child still watches the world through your eyes. Or you may imagine a future version of yourself, wiser and calmer, who seems to guide your present choices in subtle ways. These are emotional forms of time travel, moments when different versions of yourself brush against each other, like ripples overlapping on a calm lake. If we lean lightly into more speculative territory, there is a poetic way to explain this feeling. Some scientists speak of entanglement in the quantum world, where two tiny particles become linked in such a way that their states echo each other, no matter how far apart they are. Translated softly, without mathematical symbols or probabilities, it simply means this: two things that share a deep connection may continue to influence each other, even across distance. In the human experience, something similar seems to happen emotionally. The version of you who existed years ago and the version of you who will exist years from now can feel connected by invisible threads of memory and imagination. Your past self influences your present through lessons carried in your heart. Your future self influences your present through visions of who you hope to become. These threads guide your choices, soften your regrets, and help shape your identity. This inner time travel might be the most important kind there is. Machine-based time travel, if it ever becomes real, would be dramatic and profound, but it would not surpass the journey you already take daily. Through memory, you revisit what shaped you. Through imagination, you cultivate what you will become. Through reflection, you connect these two directions, weaving them into the person you are in this moment. And if you consider your life from this perspective, you may realize something quietly beautiful. You have already lived many versions of yourself. The child who once dreamed of the future is still inside you, whispering hopes. The teenager who felt lost or excited still lives somewhere in your memories. The older person you will become is already forming, gently guiding you away from some paths and toward others. These selves are not separate. They are all part of the same thread of time you walk upon. In this way, you are a chrononaut, a traveller through the landscape of your own story. Your journey may not involve machines or paradoxes, but it carries profound meaning all the same. Each time you revisit the past to learn from it, or imagine the future to prepare for it, you're shaping your timeline in subtle, powerful ways. And as this realization settles, a final thought begins to rise. If each moment of your life is connected through these invisible threads, memory, imagination, reflection, then perhaps the universe itself is watching through your eyes, learning through your steps, and unfolding through your choices. This gentle idea leads us to the last part of our journey, the possibility that time is not just something you move through, but something that moves through you. There is a certain quietness that comes near the end of a long journey, an easing of thought, a softening of curiosity into something calmer and more reflective. After travelling through paradoxes, branching timelines, rippling possibilities, and the landscapes of memory and imagination, we arrive at a gentle question that has rested beneath everything we've explored. What if the universe is not merely something you move through, but something that moves through you? What if your thoughts, your choices, your memories and your dreams are all part of how the universe experiences itself? This question does not require metaphysics or equations. It does not require grand claims or sharp language. Instead, it invites us to listen quietly to the way we exist from moment to moment. You're made of the same particles that drift in stars. You think with a mind shaped by millions of years of evolution. You move through a world that has made room for you in ways so intricate that they can only be noticed when you slow down long enough to feel them. In this sense, the universe is not separate from you. It lives in every breath, every heartbeat, every passing thought. Imagine for a moment that time is not a line stretching forward and backward. but a vast, shimmering ocean. Each life is a small wave rising from its surface, cresting gently, then settling back into the water. The wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, shaped into a temporary form. In the same way, your perspective, your way of experiencing time, is a temporary shape the universe takes in order to understand itself. All the paradoxes we explored, the traveller confronting their own past, the blueprint that writes itself, the echoing notes of parallel timelines, begin to take on a new tone in this light. Instead of puzzles to solve, they become reflections of the same fundamental mystery. Time is not a rigid structure, but a living fabric, and we too are part of that fabric. We are threads woven through its texture, carrying memories, choices, and sensations that give time its meaning. Consider how memory lights the past. When you recall a moment, a childhood afternoon, a faded embrace, a quiet grief, you're not merely retrieving information. You're giving the past shape again. You're allowing the universe to feel that moment one more time through you. And when you imagine the future, crafting possibilities in your thoughts, you're giving the universe a glimpse of what might come next. Your hopes become seeds it might one day choose to grow. In this sense, you're both a witness and a participant in the unfolding of reality. You don't simply move through time, you carry time within you. This idea brings a gentle, grounding peace to the chaos we saw earlier. The butterfly effect showed us how delicate and interconnected everything is, how small actions ripple outward in unpredictable ways. But when we look inward, we see a parallel truth. Your smallest emotions, your quietest decisions, your briefest pauses also ripple through your inner world, shaping the person you become. And sometimes those inner ripples reach outward, touching the lives of others in ways you may never know. What if these ripples, both inner and outer, are the universe learning, adjusting, becoming more aware of itself? Imagine a traveller standing at the edge of two timelines. One leads toward a life filled with warmth, connection, and meaning. The other leads toward distance, hesitation, or fear. In big stories, we often imagine the traveller choosing between these paths with dramatic clarity. But in reality, such choices are gentle, unfolding across countless small moments. A smile, a refusal to rush, a breath taken before speaking. These soft decisions shape not only your life, but the world around you, and the universe, vast as it is, responds to these tiny inputs in ways we often overlook. When you think of the multiverse, the tapestry of branching outcomes, we often imagine dramatic splits. But perhaps the most profound branches are the quiet ones. The choice to show kindness instead of impatience, to forgive instead of holding a grudge, to listen instead of judge. These choices ripple like soft vibrations across the threads of your life. And because you are part of the universe, these threads become part of how the universe unfolds. There is another way to think about this. Picture an ancient tree with countless branches. Each leaf is a moment, each branch a possible path. You are one leaf on one branch, but the tree senses you through the way you move in the wind, the way you catch sunlight, the way you eventually fall and return your nutrients to the soil. In this metaphor, the universe is the tree, and your life is one of its countless expressions. And when you look back at the paradoxes, the loops, the contradictions, the branching worlds, they begin to resemble the branching limbs of that same cosmic tree, all part of its natural growth. What once seemed like puzzles might instead be glimpses into the way the universe continuously explores its own possibilities. In this gentle view, the universe doesn't fear paradoxes. It grows through them. It uses them as pathways for creativity, exploration, and resilience. Now imagine the universe watching itself through you, not with eyes or intention, but through your experiences. When you observe a sunset, the universe is observing its own light through your senses. When you fall in love, The universe is feeling connection through your heart. When you regret something, learn from something, or dream of something, the universe grows a little more aware of its own intricate dance. This is not a claim about consciousness in the scientific sense. It is a poetic way of appreciating the intimacy between your life and the cosmos. A reminder that you are not separate from the immensity around you. You're a participant in its unfolding story. And so, as we reach the final moments of this long, quiet journey through time, a peaceful thought settles in. Wherever your path leads next, into a memory, a dream, or simply into sleep, you carry with you a small glowing piece of the universe's story. You have been travelling through time your entire life, and time, in its own gentle way, has been travelling through you.